This is the Almost Timely newsletter for the week of May 5th, 2024. Content authenticity statement. 100% of this week's newsletter text was generated by me, human, though there are going to be bountiful AI generated examples in the walkthrough videos. We're going to do some walkthrough stuff here in a little while. That's all AI generated through Google's Gemini. Learn why this kind of disclosure is a good idea and might be required for anyone doing business in the EU in any capacity in the near future. What's on my mind this week? How to create high quality, unique content with generative AI. My friends and colleagues, Marcus Sheridan and Robert Rose, both made the following comments on LinkedIn recently. Marcus said, incorrect statement, AI creates bad content. Correct statement, humans that don't understand how to properly use AI create bad content. And Robert said, AI doesn't create bad or good content. It creates the most probable content. Whether or not it ends up being good is entirely up to us. These are both true statements. But the challenge with them is that there's not a lot of, as Katie likes to say, there's not a lot of so what? What do we do with these statements? Okay, great. AI doesn't create good or bad content. It's the people running it, the humans, that do. So how do we do this? How do we create good content with generative AI? Well, first, we should probably come up with a definition of what constitutes good or bad content. If you can't define that, if you don't know what that is, you can't really judge whether AI is creating good or bad content. Let's face it, there's an awful lot of really bad content out there. CMI, the Content Marketing Institute, defines content marketing, by proxy content, as follows. Content marketing is a strategic marketing approach focused on creating and distributing valuable, relevant, and consistent content to attract and retain a clearly defined audience and ultimately to drive profitable customer action. So, great content should be valuable, should be relevant, should be consistent, made for a clearly defined audience with the intent of driving useful action. That's a decent starting point. That's a decent definition. Can AI do that? Yeah. Consistent sure is no problem, right? Machines can scale the creation of content so that you have a never-ending supply of it, right? That leaves relevant and valuable for a clearly defined audience. So that's where we'll start today's exploration. First, we should recap how generative AI, large language models in particular, generate anything. As Robert pointed out, AI models generate based on probabilities. Inside these models is a statistical library. It's a huge library of statistical data, piles and piles of numbers that document the mathematical relationships between words, for parts of words, phrases, sentences, paragraphs, and documents. It's just a massive, massive library. In fact, in recent academic papers, there was one on retrieval heads. These papers look at how large language models actually work because we don't really know. It's funny. We have this transformational technology and we're still trying to figure out how these things actually work. And the most recent research showed that 5% of the actual model is what's called a retrieval head. This is a part of the statistical library that has pointers to the rest of the library. The best analogy for this mechanism is a real library. If you're under 30, you may not have been in one recently, but libraries is a place where they have these things called books. Anyway, suppose you walked into a real library looking for a book and you walked up to the librarian and said, "Hi, I need help finding a book." And the librarian might naturally say, "Great, what kind of book?" And if you answered, a book, what kind of results you're going to get? Yeah, you're walking home with the nearest book, the book that was nearest to the librarian, which is probably not what you wanted, although who knows? If you answered, "Oh, I'm looking for some 18th century romance novels," you're going to get directed to a specific shelf within the library, and if the librarian is bored, they might go and get you, a selection of books. Like, here's a bunch of different ones you could look at. If you placed a book on the counter and said, "I need volume 2 in this series," you're going to get volume 2, assuming the library has it. It's highly specific, and the probability of other books matching that criteria are very low, right? Because you're saying, "Here's volume 1. I've got volume 1. I need volume 2." We know that today's biggest, best models like Claude 3 Opus, Google Gemini, and probably GPT-4 Turbo, we don't really know for sure, all likely use the latest model architectures, which means they have, instead of one librarian, They have a small staff of librarians waiting to help you with a head librarian who will direct you to the appropriate subordinate librarians based on your needs. If you go in asking for cookbooks, the head librarian shuffles you off to the librarian who knows the cooking section well, and so on and so forth. And this is the technical name for this is called mixture of experts. So, what does this have to do with building valuable, relevant content for clearly defined audience? It's exactly the same thing. We need to know what constitutes valuable, relevant content, and we need to know who the clearly defined audience is. If we don't have either of those things defined, then when we approach a large language model to generate content, it's going to generate content that's not valuable or relevant. Valuable content itself, that phrase alone, that's too vague. What constitutes value? What makes content valuable to someone? Generally speaking, I've always gone by what I call the 3 E's of content: entertaining, emotionally engaging, or educational. If your content doesn't hit at least one of those, it's not going to resonate. People people want to feel stuff when they consume content, which is why more people watch Netflix than C-SPAN. For international folks, C-SPAN is a commercial-free uh, cable television network that just shows like congressional proceedings. It's really boring, really boring. People want to be educated and entertained, learn how to do things, learn how to make their lives easier, learn how to make a cheesecake. So valuable content should hit at least one of the 3 E's. 2 out of 3 ain't bad, and the trifecta, all 3, is your goal as a content creator. Relevant content is based entirely on the target audience. You can't create relevant content if you don't know who the audience is, because you don't know who's relevant to. This is where you create an ideal customer profile of some kind so that you can generate content with a language model targeted towards that profile, that person. In the March 31st edition of this newsletter, we walked through step by step how to create this. There's a whole video on that. One other aspect of content that's part of relevant and valuable is uniqueness. Very often, people people value things that are scarce and unique, which means that if you're invoking very broad generalities with generative AI, you're giving it very general prompts, you're going to create fairly generic, not unique content. So, how do we do this? Well, let's go ahead and get started here. Bring up the ye old Gemini 1.5 interface. This is Google's AI Studio. What we're going to do today works with any large language model that's a mixture of experts model. So Claude 3 Opus probably is. We know for sure Google Gemini is, and probably the paid version of ChatGPT. So for all of these are the paid versions of these models, not the free ones. Let's start with our our target audience, our relevant audience. We use Robert and Marcus as our examples. So this is exactly from a couple weeks ago. Go to their profiles, download both their PDFs. You're gonna need them. Let's prime the model. Which, by the way, if you don't know what that means, there is a worksheet that is totally free. Go to trustinsights.ai/power questions, and you can download this worksheet. It's called the PAIR framework. Prompt, augment, forget what the R is, and evaluate. Refresh. Prompt, augment, refresh, evaluate. Should know that. So gonna say today we're going to build some unique and relevant content. To begin, we want to define our audience. What do you know about about the best practices for building an ideal customer profile? So what we're doing, we're going to prime the model, which means we're going to invoke a lot of the statistically probable knowledge the model has about what belongs in a profile, in an ideal customer profile: demographics, firmographics, psychographics, behavioral needs, objectives, goals, etc., pain points, you name it. Let's make sure we've got everything in here. Needs and challenges. Great. Great. I'm going to give you 2 LinkedIn profiles that represent our ideal customers. Build out a synthesized ideal customer profile using these two LinkedIn profiles as your basis. Go up to the file menu, choose file upload, go to our desktop and get Robert and Marcus's LinkedIn profiles. And let's see what Gemini comes up with. All right, so we have here demographics, firmographics, psychographics, which is psychology, behavioral information, needs and challenges, goals and objectives, some additional notes. So this is a really robust ideal customer profile. If I wanted to target Robert and Marcus and people like them, people very much like them. So that's step one. Now let's reprime the model by starting in on our task. We're going to start in by saying, great, using this ideal customer profile as a guide for who will be consuming our content. Today, we want to write a thoughtful piece about how to create content for LinkedIn, a LinkedIn content marketing strategy. What do you know about best practices for creating a LinkedIn content marketing strategy? So again, we're going to now prime the model with all of its inherent latent knowledge, everything it has been out there and consumed for this particular topic. And this is what we want to create is this topic. So we have content pillars, optimize your company page, so on and so forth. Okay, this is okay, but this is, as you might imagine, pretty bland. How can we make it less bland? Remember my example. If you walk into the library and put down a big book of stuff and say, I want more of this specific kind of book, you're going to get a better result. So let's do exactly that. Great. We want to focus on content marketing and creating content that performs well on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has published more than 5 dozen engineering blog posts that detail how their systems work. Please read through these blog posts and make an outline of the technologies and algorithms that power the LinkedIn newsfeed. Now, if you are unfamiliar, LinkedIn's engineering blog, this is one of the things it's very funny. My friend Amber Naslin talks about this a lot. LinkedIn doesn't make it a secret about how it works, about how their internal systems work. It's not like it's some privately held thing. It's just that it's a lot of information and it can be fairly technical in nature, but their engineering teams have been very clear. Here is how LinkedIn works. And I've gone through the last 5 years and just built a collection of all of these blog posts that the engineering team has put together. You can combine that, if you want to get super fancy, combine that with interviews with LinkedIn's engineering team on podcasts like This Week in Machine Learning and AI, as well as other YouTube channels and so on and so forth. So what we want to do is we want to leverage all of this information because this is going to be more unique than just a generic content outline. And so what we see Gemini doing is reading through those 68 blog posts, which, by the way, works out to 100,000 words of very technical content to come up with things like follow feed, Kafka, Pratt. So this is in basic infrastructure. We have a 2-pass ranking system. We have XGBoost and embedding-based retrievals. So these are all very technical terms for how LinkedIn chooses what content to feature in its feed. Dwell time analysis, multi-objective optimization. I remember that paper. Auto ML frameworks, third eyes. Okay, great. So we've got a lot of really very specific stuff now. So we're going to say, great. Now let's focus on just creating content for the LinkedIn newsfeed based on the technologies and algorithms you've outlined above. refine our guidance in our article about how to create content for LinkedIn to closely align to those algorithms, especially candidate selection. Let's see, what are the other ones in here? Dwell time, ranking systems, and embedding based retrieval. All right, so we're gonna give it some very specific technical things. These are the technologies that most influence the news feed. And so we now need to generate a candidate for our unique content that hones in on those topics. Okay, so we've got now this more technically aligned article. What we want to do now is realign it with our ideal customer profile. So we say, great, this is useful and good. Let's now rewrite it, preserving all the highly specific information and guidance about how to align content with algorithms and technologies, but rewrite it to be appealing to our ICP, our ideal customer profile. Ensure that the guidance for creating great LinkedIn content is appropriate for our ICP's needs and pain points. So now let's see what it comes up with. Okay, so we've got now a piece of content that has the technical aspects and also has been tuned for our ICP based on Marcus and Robert. Let's go take a look through this and see what we've got here. We have engagement as a catalyst, spark meaningful dialogue, content diversification for impact with a multifaceted approach, commanding attention through value, prioritize quality and substance, algorithmic engagement for alignment for visibility, harnessing the power of connection, data-driven refinement. How are we feeling about this? Seems like a pretty unique, valuable. It's valuable. It's relevant. For sure, it's relevant. It's valuable, yeah, to some degree. But I would say that it's probably not terribly unique, right? This is stuff. This is like eat your vegetables, right? Or go to the gym. This is all stuff that we know to do. We just don't do it. So how would we increase the uniqueness? What we'll do is what's called contrastive prompting. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take this article as is, say this is a good start, but this is all fairly common, obvious advice. Using your knowledge of our ICP and using the engineering knowledge I provided from LinkedIn, please create some uncommon, non-obvious advice. Here is an example of obvious advice. Do not give this advice. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to take two things. I'm going to take that post that it just wrote. I'm going to scroll back up here to that very generic, here, the building the winning LinkedIn marketing content strategy, right? Because this is what everyone their cousin's going to put in. We're going to copy that. I'm going to put that into our obvious stuff here. And generate a new outline of non-obvious content marketing strategies for LinkedIn's newsfeed based on the ICP engineering knowledge, avoiding the above obvious content. And I'm just going to double check to make sure that it's clear. Give it a little bit of spacing. Here, do not give this advice. So contrastive prompting is essentially gives a model an example of what not to do. So don't do this. We've seen this. We've done this already. And it is a super powerful way to get at things that are more unique, because essentially what you're doing is, instead of taking the probable obvious stuff from what the model returns you, saying disqualify all this. So it'd be like going to the librarian and saying, I want some gardening books, but I don't want gardening books about this, and this. And that knocks out a whole shelf of stuff that, they know, okay, well, I can't get this. So what's near those books that's related, but isn't in that section that you said, I don't want any part of this shelf of gardening books. Let's see what it's come up with, because I'm already seeing some very, very interesting things here. The uncommon strategies to conquer the LinkedIn algorithm. Trigger the follow feed cascade. Focus on capturing immediate engagement within the first hour of posting. This signals relevance to the algorithm and increases the likelihood of broader distribution through follow feed. Leverage employee advocacy. Engage with comments strategically. That's something that our friend Hanasabo does all the time. Optimize dwell time beyond readability. Multi-part series, interactive elements. Understand the multi-objective optimization dance, balancing virality and value, targeted engagement strategies, diversification beyond format, so content themes, content cross-pollination. It's one of those things that people forget about. If you want to juice the LinkedIn algorithm, get your audience to jump in on it. Get a really good email service provider, put up a piece of pillar content on LinkedIn and send an email about it. Say, hey, go like this post on LinkedIn. Works on YouTube too. Leveraging LinkedIn groups, alternative ranking models, and things like that. So this article now is a lot more interesting, right? You may have not even heard of the follow feed cascade. Now that you know about it, you're like, oh, there's a there. And so we've gone from useful content, right? That's not original, that's not unique, that's not it's valuable, but it also is obvious. We now have much more unique, highly relevant, probably valuable, and created for a specific target audience, for Robert and for Marcus to do this with their stuff, with really interesting things. Now, is this content right for everyone? No. It's made specifically for this ICP, not for me or you, because we're probably not in that ICP. But are there parts that are highly relevant to all of us? Yeah, there are. The process of making unique, valuable content inherently makes content that's most valuable to the target audience. And the further away you are from the target audience, the less valuable it gets. But this is how you use generative AI to create great content. You have your relevant audience, your target audience through your ICP. You bring in a lot of data to essentially cover the ground to say, here's the data source I want you to draw from, instead of hallucinating. You do model priming for all the major steps, and then you do contrastive prompting to say, okay, here's the obvious stuff. I don't want this anymore. Don't do this. Give me something better. Give me something different. And providing those examples will really do that. This is how you're going to build really good content with LinkedIn, for LinkedIn, or anything, for any content application. This is how you do it. This is how you get to the good stuff. You follow these steps: ideal customer profile, model priming, bring your own data, contrastive prompting. Shameless plug: if you want help building out this set of systems and processes for your company, this is literally what my company does. So there's a link in the newsletter. Hit me up if you want our help. All right. What else happened this week? I did a webinar on generative AI for agencies. Go check that out. The link's at the top of the newsletter. Did a really fun discussion this week with Katie about AI ethics for the Trust Insights podcast. There's a link in the newsletter for it. Go listen to that episode, and I would love to hear your thoughts about it. One thing I forgot to cover in the episode was the names of the two schools of ethics. One is called consequentialism, aka the outcomes matter, and then one is called deontology, aka the rules matter. And which school of thought you fall into when it comes to ethics in general, and then ethics specifically in AI. So go check that out. Let's see, jobs this week. What's new? We have brand manager at Amplify, lead gen manager at Pella Windows, director of platform engineering at the Pokemon Company. Oh, that'd be fun. Director of product marketing at Automation Anywhere. We have manager of program management at Freshworks. We have manager of social impact at TikTok, market growth manager at Maximus, product marketing manager at MathWorks, program manager at Catapult Design, Director of Growth at Accelerate Change Network, and Senior Director of Digital Marketing at Goji Labs, and VP of Brand at Spring Health. So lots of stuff going on there. I will say, this past week, I was looking at some marketing data about open job positions, and there are a lot of markets that are not great right now. The worst of the right now is the UK. So if you're a marketer in the UK, if you're thinking about leaving your job, do not, until you have something else lined up, because it is not a good environment right now. Other things that happened this week, we've got, all sorts of stuff. But one of the things that caught everyone's attention was a question about whether Google lost market share in search. And StatCounter did publish this thing saying that Google went from 86% market share to 77%. And StatCounter's like, yeah, we're checking that out to see if that's what actually happened. A lot of the folks who are in the generative AI space are making the suggestion that perhaps Google is losing ground to generative AI. We'll see if that's actually true or not. That remains to be seen. Other things that happened this week, CCPA rules on AI. This is a useful piece of content from our friends and colleagues at IBM, talking about the rules for the use of generative AI and whether or not you're allowed to use generative AI with customer data that you have. It is still being debated. It is not law yet, but be aware of that. In fun stuff, I caught Nerdforge's building a PC that makes coffee, which is crazy. Flor Jansson's cover of Euphoria, and a fun piece on Delish, foods that you thought were Mexican but aren't. Spoiler, it's most of the ones, at least that Americans know as Mexican foods, really were invented in either Texas or California, like chimichangas or tacos al pastor. But actually, that's Lebanese, at least the process of it. So it was a fun article. Upcoming events. I am headed out in a week to Melbourne, Australia for the Australian Food and Grocery Council's event, Food and Grocery Australia. I'm looking forward to that event. It's going to be a lot of fun talking with brands about the use of generative AI within that industry. Followed by that, I'll be in LA for the Society for Marketing Professional Services, doing a 2-day workshop on generative AI, incorporating a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about the newsletter, as well as the overall talk. And then the Marketing AI Conference in Cleveland and the Marketing Profits B2B Forum in Boston. We'll be doing a workshop and a talk there. So that is the news for this week. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you give this stuff a try, trying out things like contrastive prompting, trying things out like ICP creation. It will dramatically increase the quality of content you get out of AI, and it will help you make the most of the tool, make the most of it. So thanks for tuning in, and I will talk to you next time. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And if you want to know when new videos are available, hit the bell button to be notified as soon as new content is live.